Hello, viewers. My name is Kendall Svengalis. I'm the president of New England Law Press. I'm the former Rhode Island State Law Librarian. I have a strong interest in education, and I'm here today with Dr. Armand Fusco, who is the former school superintendent in Walpole, Mass. And in Branford, Connecticut. And we're here to talk about his recent book, which is entitled, Does Your Child Attend a Safe School? No. The subtitle of this book is What Parents and Policymakers Need to Know and More. 364 shootings, 554 deaths, and 311,000 children exposed to gun violence. These issues are very prominent in the town of Guilford, and Armand has addressed these in a detailed way. This book is a compendium of great information. It's a veritable Bible for anyone interested in school safety, particularly administrators and superintendents who supervise and should be directing safe school plans, but in many cases are not doing them. And if they are doing such plans, the plans are grossly deficient and don't address a number of the critical issues. So Armand and I are going to be discussing this and other school-related issues today. And just to say a few brief words about Armand, he received his doctorate in education at UMass, and he's originally a native of New Britain, went to Connecticut schools, but got his doctorate at UMass. He's been a teacher and a administrator for many years, and if I can say, give away his age, he's 91, and he's still working. So in his retirement, he's devoted himself to issues related to school administration, issues like safety, school corruption. His previous book was on school corruption, and another one that dealt with the plight of black boys and the racial achievement gap that is very concerning to him and should be to all people, that these racial achievement gaps have not shrunk for decades, and public schools have not addressed these. So we're going to be delving into these issues today, and with that, I'll turn it over to Armand a little bit.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, at my age, I should be in a rocking chair, not rocking the boat, but somebody has to do it. Thank you for your kind words, Ken. It's always good to start a discussion with something a little shocking. That will get your attention. Do you know that the first responders are not required to encounter a shooter on site? That's the law. They do not have to encounter the shooter on site. Does that make sense? But that's the law. The details are in the book. I can't get into all the details at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I know from reading your book that the safety officials, fire, police, they have a general obligation to deal with the public, but not an individual one. So they have no obligation to actually engage. It's interesting, and the Supreme Court has ruled this. So that has something to do with the fact that in many cases they have remained reticent about actually engaging these shooters at schools. And probably the worst example was in Uvalde, Texas, where there were over 300 public safety people there, and they didn't do anything. It was a real tragedy. Well, what I'd like to do right now is to get into your recently published book, and Does Your Child Attend a Safe School? Can you give me a quick overview of the book to start?
Yes. This really was a 2-year project. What I do every day is research, so I am only concerned with facts and factual information. I'm not concerned with theories, concepts, claims that the others are concerned about. So that's what the book is all about. You'll get factual information, and it's loaded, I say it really covers the waterfront. The book covers the 364 shootings, along with the fact that there actually have been 2,000 shootings but none of them, the rest do not have they did not have victims. So if you don't have a victim, it's not considered a shooting. Yet those students were all exposed to shooting in their classrooms.
Right.
Now, this is intended for parents and policymakers. I'd like to say it's also for administrators, but I'm beginning to wonder if they really care. I gotta be honest with you. All my research suggests that they want to take something like this and, in a sense, shove it under the bus. They don't want anything to be negative about the school, and school safety becomes a real negative issue if there are problems. And they have many problems with the safe school plans that we'll get into. The book provides 52 reasons why schools are not safe. If that isn't enough, there's 364 reasons why they're not safe, because that's the number of shootings.
Wow.
Parents will be pleased to know that you do play a role and should play a role, because if you don't do it, the administration is not going to do it. So it falls upon you to do something with other parents, and logically you should do it with a PTA, for example, or a PTO. And from all the evidence that I've gathered thus far, they're not doing a single thing in Guilford in terms of addressing this issue of school safety. And I find that highly disturbing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's my sense that parents put a lot of trust in the schools. New parents want to be supportive of schools, and they put their trust in administrators, and sometimes that trust is misplaced. And they need to look beyond the surface and get involved. And so when these safe school plans were developed, parents weren't involved and other stakeholders weren't involved. So that's a problem. Now, your first issue is that safe and secure schools are not the first priority of too many superintendents and boards of education. So why do you believe this is the case?
Very simple to prove. Go through the minutes of the board meetings. Go back 5, 10, 20 years if you want. Find a situation where they actually voted that school safety was going to be the #1 priority of the school district above all else, because it's law. Everything else is not, but that is law, and that should be #1 priority, and it is not #1 priority in most schools. That's the tragedy. That's why we have the school shootings. It is not a priority, and that's why the parents have to get involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, you've chosen Guilford as your example because it doesn't have a safe school plan, and why did you choose it in comparison to other school systems in Connecticut?
Well, for one reason, I've been a resident of Guilford for 37 years. So it's a community I know, a community I love, a community that it's always been expressed as the friendliest town on the shoreline. Now it's no longer that. It's a fractured town because of what the school system has done.
Right.
That's why I've targeted Guilford, because there's no excuse for what has happened in the Guilford school system. There's no justification for it. There's no evidence for it. And laws are being broken left and right like nothing at all. It means nothing. The laws are just to be shredded. This is not what we are about as Americans. We were built on a system of laws. That's what made our system great. If you don't obey the laws, what happens? And these are administrators, trained people, who are not obeying the laws. BOE are not doing the laws either. And I'll give you specific examples. If you read the role of the school board, what their responsibilities are, which is PA, a Public Act 220-E, it spells out in that particular section that they're supposed to implement a district curriculum committee. Where is this district curriculum committee in Guilford? I can't find it. I've asked, where is it? And the only response I got was, You'll get a kick out of this. The social worker is the committee in the elementary school. The social worker, not plural, singular.
Right.
Now, is this how a committee is formed? And then a person who wrote a letter to the editor claiming a lot of inefficiencies and ineffectiveness, he was told that there were 2 ad hoc committees, and that was justification for having a district curriculum committee. The problem is this: an ad hoc committee is temporary. It is not permanent. The district curriculum committee is supposed to handle all curriculum issues, period. No ifs, no ands, no buts. Who has handled all this curriculum about the racial agenda in Guilford? The superintendent.
Right.
He alone has pushed the entire agenda. If there's any question about that, just look at what he did. He passed out a book by Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. He gave that book, purchased by taxpayer money, to every staff member. That's unheard of for a superintendent to do something like that, because that's telling the staff what he wants done. That is not his role. I've been a superintendent. I know that's not his role.
Right.
Yet that's the role he has played from the beginning. That's why they have not had any committees, because he wants to control the entire process. So that's one reason why I picked Guilford, along with the fact that they've been very negligent in terms of employing a variety of laws. And we'll get into that in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, in that regard, I'd like to read a quote from Ibram Kendi from something he wrote in 2003. And it's very reflective of the man's philosophy, which was then passed on or enunciated in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. This is what he wrote in 2003. Europeans are simply a different breed of human. They're socialized to be aggressive people. They are taught to live by the credo, survival of the fittest. They are raised to be racist. Caucasians make up only 10% of the world's population, and that small percentage of people have recessive genes. Therefore, they're facing extinction. Whites have tried to level the playing field with the AIDS virus and cloning, but they know these deterrents will only get them so far. This is where murder, psychological brainwashing, and deception come into play. Europeans are trying to survive, and I can't blame them for that. However, I'm not going to just sit back and let them physically, mentally, socially, spiritually, and economically destroy my people. That was Kendi in 2003. And I would like, at this point, to compare that to something Thomas Sowell wrote in his book, Intellectuals in Race. That's this book by Thomas Sowell, great American economist, who happens to be black, wrote this: even those who can manage to escape the false dichotomy and its intolerable alternatives, which are genetic determinism and discrimination. And just as an aside, what he's talking about is in the early part of the 20th century, progressives were almost uniformly in favor of eugenics and thought that blacks, Southern Europeans, Eastern Europeans were somehow deficient people. Totally false. But they believed that. And they passed that on to Adolf Hitler, by the way, that concept. Those people would need to recognize that those who lag, for whatever reasons, face a daunting task of bringing themselves up to the level of the rest of society in knowledge, skills, and experience, and in the attitudes necessary to acquire this knowledge and these skills and experience. Particular individuals may be able to do so within their own lifetimes, but for millions of people from a lagging group, to do so would be harder and take far longer, even if their leaders were urging them in that direction, and virtually impossible when their leaders are fiercely promoting the idea that their lags are due primarily, if not solely, to the malice of other people. And so that gets at the crux of what we're facing with the racial achievement gap. when young black boys, for instance, are being told that their failures are the fault of some other people, and they don't make the effort to try to achieve when there are people all around them that want to help them achieve. And both Armand and myself are very interested in that. I write vocabulary building books that are aimed at minority kids. I want to help try to shrink this achievement gap, but it's remained static for decades. And that's where the real problem is. It's not on blaming someone else, it's helping those rise up. Okay? So before we get into the details involved in the school safety, could you give us an idea of how the Safe School Climate Plan should proceed?
Yeah, first of all, it's a national plan. It's not just in Connecticut. All but 6 states require their districts to develop a safe school plan. The tragedy and stupidity of it all is that there's no model to follow. In other words, what is supposed to be a model for a safe school plan? It does not exist. All these educated people can't come up with a model. I've come up with a model, and it's in my book.
Right.
I'm one individual, but at least I've prepared a model.
Right.
And if they follow that model, they can have a safe school. But all of these other people, for some reason, can't come up with one. So that's the first issue, is there's no model to follow. So you can't blame a lot of the officials. They haven't been trained in how to do a model or even to develop a safe school plan. Now let's get to Guilford. Who developed the plan for Guilford? Very intelligent. Only the administrators developed the plan. The victims, the teachers, and the students had nothing to do with it, and the parents had nothing to do with it, but the real crowning part of it is the first responders had nothing to do with it. And they're the ones who are supposed to show up first and know what to do. So it's no surprise when you get Uvalde making a statement by the police chief that he didn't know who was in charge. You talk about stupidity.
Yeah.
These are the people who should be involved. They're called the stakeholders. The stakeholders are not involved, were not involved. Why were they all excluded? Because he wanted to have it done a specific way to get it out of the way so he could say it was done. Now what he's going to say is it was approved by the state. Big deal. They were all approved by the state. And they ran in pages from roughly 12 to 60 pages, depending on the district. Now how could all of those be approved? There were 17 requirements by the law in terms of what they should cover, but it all reflected just bullying. Bullying is not the problem that they say it is. It is a problem. It's a condition. It is not the root cause. So this just another example.
Right.
The real tragedy with the school plan is from 2011, when it was written, there has been no improvement in that plan until 2023. This despite the fact that in 2014, a law was passed that each school building was supposed to have a safe school plan.
That's right.
As well as a safe school committee. Where are those committees? Do they know they exist? I'm sure they're going to say they exist, but they don't exist because there's no minutes of these meetings. If they existed, there'd be minutes of the meeting.
Right.
So that's another issue. Why were there no improvements? Within the plan, they don't even follow the plan that they write. They're supposed to meet semi-annually, the administrators, to see if they should make any improvements. If they've met, there's no evidence.
Right.
There was no improvement, so that means over 10 years, when there was more shootings, more analysis of what's happened, that they couldn't come up with any improvements in the plan. Wow. But he made one big significant change in the last change. He put in the portrait of a graduate. Tell me what that has to do with a safe school plan.
Right. Right.
It's all a philosophy that he has in the plan. It is not a plan that, number one, does not deal with a shooter on site. If you're not dealing with a shooter on site, what's the purpose of the plan?
Right.
Who should be dealing with the shooter on site? Who are the first responders? It's not the police.
Yeah.
The first responders are the staff and the students.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who have to deal with the shooter. By the time the first responders show up, they've already committed the crime. They've already committed the victims.
Right. Right.
Uvalde was a perfect example of it. But this is what happens when you don't pay attention to the plan. This plan has been collecting dust on a shelf, as many others are, not just Guilford.
Right.
Many others just sat on the shelf saying, we got a plan. Yeah, if you got a plan and you don't work it, it's meaningless.
Right. Yeah, it just shows you what a low priority it's been in
Oh, yeah,
Guilford and
it's-
many
it's
places.
no priority.
Yeah.
The priority in Guilford is the equity and social justice agenda. The racial agenda has priority, and that's not a law.
Right.
But they give that priority above all else.
Mm-hmm.
Show me one instant where the board has ever asked the superintendent about the safe school plan, to give a report on what's happening with the safe school plan. Have they even read the safe school plan?
Right. Right.
How many parents had even read the safe school plan?
Yeah.
So they have some responsibility here too.
Right. Right.
It's their children who are at risk. Now, let's face another fact at Guilford. They had a threat assessment. I mean, they had a threat, but they did not deal with it with a threat assessment.
Right. Right.
You talk about shoving something under the bus and get rid of it quick. They did that. A student showed up at the high school with a gas mask. Now, what does that signify? Chemical and biological interest.
Yeah.
All day long, he was in school with a gas mask. They deny now it even happens, even though students took pictures. Then the administrators found out they were taking pictures. They called him into the office and told him to get rid of the pictures. Destruction of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing after another, they just don't care about the laws. It's their image. You see, it's all about image.
Right. Right.
That's what comes first. And that's the tragedy of all the school shootings. Every school shooting had a threat made before the actual shooting occurred.
Right.
They went unheeded by 364 administrators. They just paid no attention to the threat. Uvalde had the threat a year in advance. Paid no attention, and they had a good school plan. But it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if the plans aren't going to do the job, something else has to replace it. That's what that book is all about. How you can replace it with something that's more effective to make the teachers and the students have the ability for self-defense, non-lethal self-defense. They don't need guns, except one exception. But as long as the shooting takes place in the building, there's a whole plan on how to deal and isolate and disable the shooter. It can be done very easily with gates,
Mm-hmm.
with what I call a window door, and also talking doors.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
I got all nice things like that in it.
Yeah. Right. Right.
There's the way to deal with the shooters. Now, how do shooters get in to
Yeah.
the building? 75% get in from the front door.
Right. Yeah.
We know that.
Yeah.
That's where the concentration should be. You need a double set of doors in the front so that you can trap them in between.
Right.
But that doesn't work when schools or when students are arriving because there are too many students.
Yeah.
So they go in with the students. They don't know if they're a substitute teacher or some visitor or something else.
right.
They just walk in. Or if they're a student, they're not even recognized as an adult.
Yeah.
So this is what takes place with the shooters. Now, what do they know about the shooters? They're white, angry, suburban boys.
Right. That's right.
Do you know, and parents pay attention to this one, no shootings occur in the city schools.
Yeah.
The shootings only occur in suburban rural schools. At least that's to date.
Right.
Now, you would expect the shootings to occur in the city school where guns are more available,
Right.
where there's more anger, more hate, more racism, more of everything. But it's not happening there. It's happening in white suburban schools. So what is taking place in the white suburban schools that is creating this anger? That's something nobody's really taken a look at because they have not identified it as the problem. Girls rarely are involved.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a couple of cases, but not many. Now, there's a problem with the boys, a big problem, and that's a separate book. I
Right.
call it the boys' academic pandemic. Can't read, can't learn. Boys are on what I call a short list of accomplishments now compared to girls.
Right.
The girls outdistance the boys in every endeavor, and yet they keep pushing that the poor girls that are not breaking through the ceiling, the glass ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
they've outdone the boys in everything, including college.
Right. That's right.
Is that creating part of that anger where the boys are starting to feel they don't count? I don't know, because nobody's really made a study. But that's part of the problem is the boys. It's not the girls. When they put all the students together, it's the wrong thing to do. And it's the white boys, not black boys. They don't want to face that issue.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the girls have achieved amazing success in the last 30, 40 years. You know, they're now, what, roughly 60% of college students? They're now a majority in law schools. I think they're in, if not a majority in medical schools, if not close. And they're also involved in so many more activities as leaders in various activities on their college campuses and such. And yet, in pushing girls, which was a great thing. I mean, I have a daughter and a granddaughter, but they neglected the boys because the girls surpassed the boys, and the boys were left in the dust. And so that's a very likely possibility that's.
There's only one institute that concentrates on boys. It's called the Gurian Institute. And his whole effort is to address the issue with boys. That's the only one I know of. There are girl advocates of all kinds. Find a boy advocate group.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Right.
No one's advocating for the boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of this problem that nobody really has addressed or paid attention to. But I'd like to get back to one of your quotes that you started with, Kendi. What he says in his book and what is said in the schools because of that book is all of us, all whites are racist, period.
Right.
No ifs, no ands, no buts. We're all racist. How did they get the civil rights movement without the whites? I'll never understand.
Yeah.
But what a statement to make to students that we're all racist and we gotta do something to overcome the white privileges that we have. They forget there's also black privileges. And sometimes there's more black privileges than white privileges. And I'll give you an example. It goes back a little ways, but it's just an example. In World War II, for every 400 whites who died, one black died. Now, why did that happen? Because they were discriminated against. They wouldn't put them on the front lines. They were behind the lines. That's why they didn't kill as many. That was a privilege.
Yeah.
They lived longer than a lot of those teenagers who died during World War II.
Yeah.
So sometimes it works for them, not against them.
Right. Yeah.
So white privilege exists. Everybody tries to achieve privilege. Everybody. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to achieve privileges. That's just innate that people, that's what motivates them.
Right.
To get privileges. That's not a sin. It's not a racism. And yet, what do you hear about racism? Apple pie are racist. Imagine apple pie, they're racist. And when you go to the bathroom and put in the soap on your hand, that is also racist. Would you believe it? Everything is racist today.
Right.
Where does that take you? Providing hate for everything? Saying everything is racist?
Yeah.
This is what we're teaching in our schools today? Is it any wonder that 2/3 of the students don't read proficiently? That the scores on the National Assessment of Educational Progress have been flat for 40 years?
Yeah, that's right.
Despite the fact that class size went from 28 to 13.
Yeah.
So reducing class size doesn't achieve anything. It certainly hasn't achieved it to date. Why? Because teachers don't do anything different with 13 or 20 or 25. That's why. They teach the same thing, the same course, the same content, etc.
Right, right, right.
Well, supposedly they get more attention. Maybe. But does that make it better? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it sure doesn't show up with test scores. Now, part of this racial issue in Guilford and the other places like it is they want to destroy testing and standards. They want to get rid of meritocracy. You're talking about the achievement gap. Connecticut has the largest achievement gap of all the states.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We're a state of really two school districts, city and suburban. Everybody knows that. Now, in 2012, the legislature passed a law. Part of that law said we have to take these failing schools from the cities and turn them around, make them successful. At that time, there were 136 failing schools in Connecticut, all in the cities. Interestingly, all the cities controlled by one particular party, with one exception. They're the ones supposedly advocating for blacks, yet they allow the failing schools to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Any Board of Education today, right now, this minute, all they have to do is vote a failing school out of existence. It's that easy to do. They don't need state permission. And they can change them into a charter school. A district did that all of you know about, called New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Big district, which was the largest, most corrupt city school district with absolutely the lowest scores you can find. What happened? God apparently intervened with Katrina.
Katrina, that's right. Yeah.
Wiped out the city, physically wiped the school system out of existence. The legislature, by what grace they thought about it, I don't know, they made it a charter school district. Now that district was run by the union. They controlled everything.
Mm-hmm.
With the charter schools, the unions was destroyed. Now those students, in comparison to what they were achieving before, because they come from the same poor socioeconomic backgrounds as before, none of that has improved.
Right.
And yet they're doing remarkably better than they were ever doing before.
Mm-hmm.
All these excuses of socioeconomic conditions affecting blacks is a bunch of bull, in plain English.
Yeah.
They're conditions, no question about it. But they're not causes. There's a difference. But they keep using that, and that way it absolves the schools, saying we can't change these socioeconomic conditions. No, you can't change them, but you can change what you do in the classroom.
Right, right. Yeah, that's one of the great success stories in America. And another one is going on in New York in these charters that are using the same buildings as the public schools. Have been open in those parts of the school buildings that are not utilized. And Thomas Sowell wrote a whole book about that, Charter Schools and Their Enemies. And these students are doing far better than the public school students in the very same buildings because they have the freedom to engage in innovation and they don't have the union sitting on top of them trying to control things. And what I found very interesting, a few years ago, John Stossel did a story about these schools, and he went into the classrooms, and these little kids, they're almost all little black kids, Hispanic kids. I don't think there was a white kid in the classroom. And he asked them, he says, "Isn't school boring?" And the kids said, "No, we love school." It was so refreshing to hear these little kids say how they love school. And you go outside on the street in front of the school, the American Federation of Teachers is picketing to close that school.
Yeah.
That tells you all you need to know about the negative effect of teachers' unions on these poor kids in the inner cities. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to remediate, to help these kids.
Well, let's address that right here in Connecticut with the teachers' union and charter schools.
Right.
To start a charter school in Connecticut requires legislative approval. It is the only state that requires legislative approval to start a charter. That shows the power of the teachers' union.
Right, right.
And
This
only
is-
20 districts could even start a charter. So it's not something that everybody can do, even if they had the opportunity.
Right. Now, do they do this by district, or individual schools have to apply to the legislature?
Individual schools.
Yeah.
And because of that law, since 2015, there has not been a new charter school in Connecticut, where all the other states are going wild with charter schools.
Yeah.
So it's the teachers' union that's pushing it because they're in bed with the Democratic Party. I'm
Right.
sorry, that's the reality.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
And we allow it to happen.
Right.
Where is the Attorney General? Where's the Commissioner of Education when they see these laws being violated? We've sent the letter, GECC sent the letter, you're familiar with it, to the Commissioner, asking for an investigation. Have we heard anything? No, we're not going to hear anything.
Yeah.
So laws could be broken and we just close our eyes. I'm not going to accept that.
Yeah.
GCC is not going to
No.
accept it.
No.
But it's going to take time to fight it. But why do we have to spend our money when they're using taxpayers' money to defend themselves?
Yeah, that's right. And now we have to take it to the Attorney General and work our way up through the hierarchy.
Right.
So we can exhaust our administrative remedies, and then if they don't respond, then we have to go to court.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's going to end up there. There's
Yeah.
no question about it.
Yeah. Because what they're doing is illegal on so many levels. They're violating so many laws and regulations. You cannot teach a singular ideology, for instance, and they're doing that.
Yeah, there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1968, Epperson versus Arkansas. It was over religion. They were trying to teach one religion in a particular community. And they decided that you cannot teach one particular dogma, or what they call concept. You have to then balance it with any opposition, otherwise you cannot teach it. In Guilford, there's one dogma, period.
Yeah.
No opposition, they're going to say, well, there's materials available. Not with the same effort of putting a book in their hands as he did with the anti-racist book. Has he done that with my book? Of course not.
Right.
Why not put this in their hands
Yeah.
so they know how to defend themselves? They won't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. And in effect, they are, if you cannot teach religion as a faith system, not I'm talking about history of religion, but as a faith system, then you cannot teach a secular religion, because it's a secular faith system. It's a belief system, and they're just contradicting themselves. And just getting back to the whole idea of the boards of education, we have an interesting dynamic in Guilford, because the Board of Education is supposed to be the body making policy, and the superintendent's role is to implement their policy. But we have the roles reversed in Guilford. He makes the policy, and the Board of Education says, I'm good with that, I'm good with that, They're just like 9 sheep who go along with the blind shepherd,
Let's take a central standard or theme of their racial agenda. It's called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're talking, of course, about students.
Right.
I'm looking at the school board. Where's the DEI?
Right.
There's no diversity, there's no inclusion, there's no equity. They're all of the same.
Right.
And it was done legally. The Republicans that have 3,000 members are not represented on the school board. That's unheard of.
Right.
And it's all legal.
Yeah.
Or it was done legally. I'm not sure if it was all legal, but it was done legally.
Yeah, I mean that was a very cynical move. It destroyed the comedy that we should have within a community. It destroyed the minority representation rule. The legislature determined this back in the 50s, that communities, because these are neighbors, should all share in the decision-making process. So you have a majority party and you have a minority party. But what the Democrats did, of course, they only had 2 candidates up in 2021. So they said, well, we've got 3 extra votes. How are we going to use those 3 extra votes? Let's get some like-minded independents, so-called, because they're basically voting with the Democratic members. And we'll have our Democrats vote for those 3 like-minded independents. And then they'll vote with us, and we'll have a unanimous board. It was so deeply cynical.
Yeah.
And they can get away with it. But it's so cynical and destructive. Why would you do that? You know, and
To
yet
to control,
yeah. And then the superintendent has no opposition. He's got a complete uniformity on the board.
Well, the board made the statement that they're there to support the superintendent. Wrong. They're there to monitor the superintendent,
Right.
not support him unless he's doing what he's supposed to do.
Right.
And he is not doing what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
I know Dr. Freeman is going to hate me for this, but you know, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And anytime he wants to debate the issue publicly, I'm available.
Yeah.
We'll go through all the laws that they're violating
Yeah.
and try to justify them. Now, let's an example. There was a student, someone who wrote a letter to the editor, Dave Holman, that outlined a lot of these discrepancies. And he claimed in a quick response that it was full of inaccuracies. Except he didn't know something, that the paper won't print it unless they check the accuracy of the statements. It took him 3 weeks at the newspaper
Right.
to check every item he had in there. They couldn't find one discrepancy. Now, trying to get that message back out to the same people that he wrote to, Freeman wrote to, Freeman refuses to do it.
Right.
He's using the taxpayers' money for his own communication and denying it to the people who support the taxes. This is going to catch up. It's going to
Yeah.
catch up.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, it's going to catch up. You can't keep denying, you can't keep violating laws and just getting away with it.
Yeah. Right.
Otherwise, we have no country, we have no school system.
No. No.
But I want to get back to something about the safe school because
Yep.
it's an important issue that should be included in every plan. Every assessment, every threat has to be done with what's called a threat assessment.
Mm-hmm.
The best one is free, available since 2000 by the U.S. Secret Service.
Right. Yeah.
They have the best threat assessment process to check out a threat. They did not use that with the gas mask situation. It was just the superintendent and the police chief.
Right.
Overnight, they determined there was no corroboration.
Yeah.
What did they mean there was no corroboration? They had photographs. That in itself is considered a gesture. That's a threat. They didn't check to see if he was doing anything on his computer, iPhone, or asking
Right.
questions in a classroom about chemical, biological situations. They didn't do any of that. But quick, let's get it off the road, because the next day the student came back, no punishment, nothing.
Right.
Where else could you wear a gas mask all day long in the school and get away with it?
Yeah.
That's, to me, still a threat, because it's not been given a threat assessment. We might still hear something from that young man, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. Right.
Instead of helping them, which they're supposed to do with
Right.
their restorative justice,
Mm-hmm.
They just let him hang by himself.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing you need in a plan is the teachers and students have to be able to defend themselves. Now, what do I mean by non-lethal? Let me give you an example. You're all familiar with what animal lovers do to bring down an animal. They use a dart gun full of drugs, put them to sleep. They go a pretty good distance. That could be one of the non-lethal pieces they can use to bring down a shooter. But before that even happens, you've got to isolate a shooter. How do you do that? With gates. Simple.
Yeah.
They already exist in schools. They gate certain corridors so that you can't penetrate certain areas of the building when you're doing an event at the school. So they have gates already. They just need some more. Then they got to be monitored someplace where someone's watching. Shooter shows up, close 2 gates, isolated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once they're isolated, a lot of nice things can happen to them too. I got that all figured out.
Yeah.
Because they won't be able to use their gun. That's when then you can use a dart gun on them. You can use a pepper spray. A pepper spray will go 20 feet with a gun.
Right, right.
There are things they can use. All they need is the availability and a little training. And again, it's non-lethal. Even if they make a mistake, nobody's going to be injured. Why don't they do this?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Why? Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
You got a solution, you're not going to use it.
Right,
You're not even going to talk about it.
right. And it's all in your book.
Yeah, it's all
It's
in the
all
book.
in your book, yeah. You know, I just have to bring up this incident regarding the gas mask because it's very interesting how Freeman was quoted about 9 times saying there's no corroboration for what this kid did. There was corroboration. It was the son of a former DARE officer who we know, and he filed a police report. And they encourage you to call the hotline to report things like this, but he filed a police report. And what I found very interesting is that I tried to get a copy of the police report from the police department, and they denied me, and they denied several other people. And I got a letter quoting some law that wasn't even applicable. So they had a lawyer there who didn't know what he was doing. He was just basically protecting the police, the chief. And so the chief was protecting the superintendent. So they're basically just in collusion. So what you have is an interesting dynamic of relationships between people like the police chief, the first selectman, and the superintendent. They're all friends. So they want to protect each other on a friendly basis, because they know each other. But that's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to the community and to the students first, not to protect each other from negative publicity. And what would have happened? Now, what they should have done, the student who filed that report, that was sufficient corroborating evidence. You don't need more. We're not talking about charging him with a criminal offense and bringing him to court. It basically would have required them actually intervening to try to help this young man and deal with his issues. So it wasn't rising to a matter of a criminal charge. That was sufficient. That was sufficient corroborating evidence. But they thought they even in that case, they had to push that under the rug. And so I was upset, particularly when I found out that they suggested that the former DARE officer and his son could be charged with filing a false police report. This was outrageous that they would suggest that. So I wrote to the police chief, but I copied the police commissioners, all 5 of them. I sent them a copy of my 4-page letter, and I went through all the details. Well, I don't know what they said in closed doors with the police chief, but a couple months later, he retired. So it's very interesting that sometimes one letter, perhaps, I can't prove it, may lead to a positive outcome.
What's interesting is I tried 3 times to get an appointment with the police chief. What's the background of this is that police chief, when he was a young recruit, worked with my son who was a recruit.
Oh.
They were friends. When he found out I was trying to get an appointment, he said, you know, I'll be in touch with you. Then all of a sudden it went dead.
Yeah.
He talked, I'm sure, to Freeman.
Right. Right.
And all of a sudden I go there myself, you know, ask for an appointment, couldn't get one. He knew I wanted to talk about safe schools. He wouldn't talk about it.
Yeah. That's
Now-
why these incidents take place, because warning signs like this are not heeded. People don't pay and act upon them. Go ahead, I interrupted.
But let's get to the municipal officials now, because these guys aren't going to get off free either. There is a law, 13-3, Section 86, that says the municipal officials are supposed to create an all-hazard plan for the community. Has that been done in Guilford?
No.
I don't know
No.
of any
Yeah.
all-hazard plan, and it's
Right.
supposed to be done in conjunction with the school plan.
Yeah.
Again, violations after violations after violations, and they all get away with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes something has to happen to bring it to a head, and it will.
Right.
It's only a matter of time. I hope I live long enough.
Yeah.
But we got to get to radicalization of education.
Yeah. So we covered a number of these things,
Yeah.
and so. Okay, so how would you describe what's going on in Guilford in terms of the radicalization of education?
It's gone to what I call extremes. The curriculum, they deny, has even been changed. I mean, I don't know how they could say that with a bold face.
Mhm.
They keep saying the curriculum has not changed. Then what is the purpose of the equity and social justice agenda? It has no purpose.
Right.
It's changing, and even it showed up when they did an equity report, when some of the teachers were interviewed, and they said they were concerned that some of this may harm children. That was a red flag, but they ignored that too.
Mm.
That means, though, the curriculum was changing.
Right.
Their own policy specified that a curriculum could be a concept, doesn't have to be in writing, it could be a discussion, it could be a field trip. It's all curriculum because it impacts students.
Right.
The equity and social justice agenda should have gone through a district curriculum committee. It didn't go any place except through Freeman's hands. He's kept it there ever since. You see any kind of committees that have been created? Where's the teachers in all this?
Right.
I don't blame the teachers because they're between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
But he is promoting one single agenda. That is radicalization for a school. You're supposed to be neutral. Why? Because you're dealing with all kinds of ethnic and racial enrollments. You can't just pick out some particular agenda that you want to put forth. You've got to be neutral.
Yeah. Yeah. And parents have different philosophies.
Right.
Some have strong religious faith. It could violate their religious faith, their political philosophy, and you're basically privileging one side of the spectrum.
Now, what's been silent in the schools, unfortunately, are the conservative students. They have no voice. They're afraid to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, oh, all the students, their needs are being addressed. Really?
Yeah.
What needs? They've never done a needs assessment.
Right.
The only needs assessment is what he determined they needed was the ESJA agenda. He determined that, nobody else. Now he'll say, well, the board approved it. Well, sure. You brought in people who were all biased
Right.
and told them what they wanted to hear to support what you wanted.
Yeah.
Did you bring in anyone else from the opposing viewpoints? No. Then you pick one of them to do an equity report.
Right.
What's an equity report? To take a look at what's happening in the district in terms of racial issues. Now, I was looking at finding some examples for the book that I was writing. It's going to be in 2 volumes. And I found a twin sister to Guilford, right across the border in Chappaqua, New York. The only difference, they have the exact same demographics. They did an equity report. The only difference is they're richer than Guilford.
Mm-hmm.
They did a report that was loaded with data and information. Unfortunately, the equity report we had done for $25,000 without any competition, without any proposals put out there for everybody to give a chance at doing that equity report. Dr. Seiler, who did it, had no experience that I know of in doing an equity report. He came up with 24 pages, but they were double-spaced. They were actually only 12 pages. Because if you read any equity report, they're all single-spaced.
Right.
Double-spaced. You should have triple-spaced. You could have got more pages.
Yeah, right.
I don't blame Seiler. He was given the information. He was just told, do it. But he wasn't prepared to do it.
No.
He only did one good thing at the end, that they have to take a better look at what's really happening. At least he was honest about that.
Yeah.
But what was cute about all of this piece is that when I went to check who did the equity report for Chappaqua, it was a system out of California. And when I went to look at their website, who came up on the website? 2 superintendents.
Yeah.
Both from Guilford, one from Guilford, Connecticut, and one from Guilford, I think, Georgia. Both saying the same thing. They're supporting what the group was doing and saying they worked shoulder to shoulder with them. They both said exactly the same thing.
Right, right.
So they weren't being paid or anything like that. What were they looking for? Why did they pick him to do that piece of information? Was Freeman looking for a job in the future when he retires? I don't know.
Right.
But after I inquired, when did he do this, all of a sudden, the thing was dead. They stopped it.
Oh. Yeah.
So it's interesting sometimes what you get a hold of.
Yeah. Yeah, that report was so defective on so many levels, No data, just some bull sessions with students and some teachers, and then he writes it up. And I mean, if you had double spaced, this book of yours would be like 900 pages. Yeah. Very interesting.
Well, radicalization really occurs when you don't have choice.
Mm-hmm.
In Guilford, there is no choice. The only choice parents have is to drop their student out of the system and homeschool. Now, they'll say there is choice. There is no choice because the ESJA is infused, these are their words, infused in every subject, in every grade. So how do you opt out?
Right.
You can't. If it was a single course, you could do that. Now the state, after studying this for months with 9 committees, to find out what they should do to address the racial issue. It took them months. Freeman couldn't wait for their decision because he already decided that he was going to do what he wanted to do. So he jumped the gun and started his agenda before even the state made a decision. That's real intelligence, because you don't know what they would have come up with.
Right.
So he must either have psychic ability, perhaps, I don't know, or he's arrogant, because that's a sure sign of arrogance when you think you can do better than 200 people participating on 9 committees.
Right, right.
Sorry, Dr. Freeman, but that's that's reality.
Yeah, yeah. And he would have had cover. He says, this is what the state recommended. We're implementing what the state has recommended. But he had to go rogue and do his own thing.
Yeah, well, all the state recommended was one course to be offered at the high school in this year, 2023, and it was an elective
Right.
for students,
Yes.
not a requirement.
Yeah.
I don't know how many students knew that, or parents. Now, they could have done anything they wanted because they had the votes to do anything they wanted.
Yeah.
I was stunned when they came up with this. Now, what's wrong with having choice when the state says that's what you should have? But we can't do it here in Guilford. It's got to be indoctrination.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to do the same thing. And we can't be just with one course. It's got to be everything, all grade levels.
Yeah.
They didn't go down below the high school. And yet the board is asking, when is it going to get to the kindergarten?
Right.
Oh
right.
my God, the kindergarten. These are really age-appropriate kids. To understand race, let's get down to 3-year-olds. They say they understand race. I mean, this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one of the Board of Ed members saying that. When are we going to get down
Yeah,
to the elementary
yeah,
level? You
yeah.
know.
I mean, do they
Yeah.
know what they're really doing?
Right. And you know, the other thing is they're driving students out of the schools whose parents understand these things are happening
Yeah.
and are willing to make the step. And we did that with my granddaughter. We pulled her out of Melissa Jones in the middle of 2nd grade because her teacher was at the parents' night. She announced that she was a social activist, and then she proved that in class because they were talking about religion in some way, and she told my granddaughter that the Bible was a fairy tale. And she grows up in a family of faith. And my daughter realized that she didn't want this to continue. This was a toxic environment for her. So she took her out, and my wife and I, grandparents, took charge of homeschooling her twice a week. And it's been very successful. She's learning all kinds of things she never would have learned in the schools. When she was 4th grade, she could have passed the citizenship test, which is kind of a reflection of the fact that I was a law librarian and know the government, and I wanted her to know that information. And if I would ask her something like, who wrote the Federalist Papers, those that take the citizenship test only have to give one name, and she could tell you all 3: Alexander Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay. She's so very proud she knows those questions. And then I will show her these clips on YouTube of people being interviewed on the street and asked questions about civics, and they're college age, and they're clueless. They can't name the 3 branches of government. They have trouble naming one. They can't even name countries that border the United States. And I say, see, Chloe, those people are voters. Isn't that scary?
Yeah.
So she feels very proud of herself, but that's one example. So people have to take their children out of school, and then in many cases, if they put them in private school, they have to spend thousands of dollars to pay private school tuition to avoid what we should be getting in a fair-minded way in our public schools. What are we paying our tax dollars for? It is just so grossly unfair. And that's why we have to do what we're doing. So,
What I want to address before we close
Yeah.
is that another book of mine is coming out shortly. It's How to Combat the Radicalization of Education. It's 1,200 pages in print, so they have to do it in 2 volumes. It's got everything you can possibly think of in terms of the issues and the problems involved with the radicalization of schools. I devote over 100 pages just to Guilford, detailing step by step what they did, how they did it, etc., to show what is actually happening in Guilford. Now, people don't want to believe it. I'm sorry, but it's truth.
yeah, right.
Now, if you don't want to read a big, thick book like that,
Yeah.
we've done it with an executive summary. With this edition, it's free, there's no cost, and it really summarizes those 1,200 pages in 100 pages. So this is hard copy that's available, and it'll also be available on a website where you can download it at no cost. And
Yeah.
that gives you really the gist of the entire 1,200 pages.
Yeah, this is roughly a 98-page document. It's produced by the Greater Education Council of Connecticut. Just go to the GECC, just Google Greater Education Council of Connecticut, and you can download the whole document. And it's got a great summary of all these issues. And we thank Armand for putting all those things together and combining the 4 books that he's working on at the age of 91. It's just amazing to me, that he's devoted all his time and effort and wisdom about school issues to this critical case of what's happening in Guilford, which is also happening around the country, thanks to radical education schools, indoctrination there, the teachers' unions who are tied at the hip to the Democrat Party, who have a political agenda, and then rogue superintendents and those who don't have the wisdom to understand that public schools are designed to serve all students. They're not supposed to push an agenda. When I was in school in the 60s, high school now, I never had a teacher express their personal political views. It was always unbiased education. Why should it have changed? It's a very sad commentary. Well,
we need to inform the public now of the folly of Freeman's agenda. His folly was following the Star by Kendi. That's what he used as his mentor. He gave that book to all the teachers. This is what we're supposed to follow because this guy's got all of the answers. Unfortunately, 3 weeks ago, Kendi got proved to be the fraud of frauds. He's a professor at the University at Boston University. The article was written by the Boston University newspaper, not by some rogue newspaper. He has his entire department of 30 people laid off because of his mismanagement of $30 million that he can't show what he's done with it after 2 years. They're investigating what he has been doing, which has been nothing except promoting his book. He's earned over $200 million with his book while letting all the rest of the stuff at the university go down the tubes. This is what they have followed. Now, how do they explain the folly? How do they justify? They're going to justify what they've done. No question about it. But how do you justify the Star falling down and you know where it went? What a tragedy. How do you fix the damage now? How do you build the trust back up? This is what GECC is trying to do, and we need parent support. And if parents don't get involved, you're going to pay for it. It makes no difference to me. I'm done. It's not going to harm me one way or the other what happens. But you parents have children here. You've got to act. You can't sit by and be a bystander. You just can't do it anymore. Not anymore in this particular situation. You've got to get involved, get information. The information's all out there. Use it. Organize, as many parents have done. Look at Moms for Liberty. They've got now 24 chapters in 2 years. And they have one here in Connecticut. That's just one of other parent organizations. They're out there. You can join them. And when you're part of a larger group, you've got power. You've got influence. But you've got to act. It's your children. If you don't care about your children, that's different. I always thought school safety was #1 for parents. I no longer believe that, based on the evidence that I've come across. You're more concerned about politics than you are about your own children. I'm sorry, that's reality. So you've got to start acting if you want to protect your own children.
What's the shame is that the ideals of Martin Luther King have been completely negated by Kendi and his ilk. That we should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I've posed this to my granddaughter too. It's interesting because she has black friends at the church, and she'll pinch her skin and say, "It's only skin color." Well, we know there's a lot of stuff behind it, but that's how we need to act. Skin color should be something far behind us. It's not important. It's a point that Dennis Prager makes. It should not be important. People try to make it more important, but that should not be in the forefront of our thinking. We should treat all people equally, you know, and that should be our ideal. One thing I'd want to add is in the front of this book, we added a special alert. So if you read this on our website, it's called The Racial Star of Ibram Kendi Has Fallen, and we have an introductory page. And then what follows is the full article from the Boston University newspaper. And we've reprinted that, and it goes into great detail into such things as the fact that Kendi does Zoom presentations. He doesn't even get in his car and drive to another community. He does Zoom presentations and charges somewhere between $20,000 and $32,000 for a 1-hour Zoom. Amazing. No wonder he's rolling in big bucks. He's worth, you know, like you said, it's $220 million he's worth. It's amazing. It just shows you that race grifting pays. And there are other people that want to get in on that. There are other writers that are trying to get in on that grift. It's a shame because they're destroying the harmony that we should be exhibiting as a community, as a state, and as a nation. Okay. Well, Armand, I want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing. It's just, I don't know what we would have done because with your knowledge and experience as a school superintendent, you know from your years serving the public that what is right and what is wrong. It comes right down to that it's the job of schools to serve the community, to serve the taxpayers, not to serve special interests like teachers' unions or ideologies. And they have that responsibility, and you've awakened us to a lot of these things, and we want to thank you for being with us today and making this an excellent presentation that I hope many people will get a chance to watch.
Wait till you get my bill.
Yeah. So, well, thank you very much.